obtain your CE credit. And the slides and the recording will be available, but you will not be able to obtain CE units by watching them, only you need to be live. And then both Jeff Baker, the Executive Director of APIC, and myself will be moderating. And just want to remind folks, so because they were able to incorporate the new data, there was a slight change to the title of the presentation and some learning objectives. So just wanted to note that, but this is postdoc related. And with that, just want to take a quick moment to introduce our speakers. Really excited to have Dr. Allison Osved, who is currently the chair of the APIC board. We also have her colleague, Amy Silber-Bogan, and she is currently the director of the VA Boston Psychology Postdoctoral Training Program at the VA Boston Healthcare System, and a number of other roles that she has. And then we also have Dr. Wayne Siegel, a former APIC board member, and he is currently the director of the training program, both the internship and 3 postdoctoral programs at the Minnesota VA Healthcare System. And lastly, we have Dr. Beth McQuaid, who is the Vice Chair and Professor of Psychiatry and Human Behavior and Professor of Pediatrics at Alpert Medical School at Brown University. So with that, I will stop share and turn it over to our speakers. Thank you. We're real excited to learn from you today.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Mary. We're delighted to be here. And Jeff, if you wouldn't mind pulling up our slide deck, we'd really appreciate it. Getting started, we just wanted to also introduce ourselves, and I'll make note that I use she, her pronouns, and I'll invite my co-presenters to share their pronouns as they introduce themselves. And we wanted to acknowledge 2 of our co-presenters or collaborators who couldn't be co-presenters today, Kylie Hagler and Catherine Ost. So big thank you to them for their participation on this project, though they aren't here presenting with us today. And Jeff, do you mind moving on to the next slide?
So, is it showing?
Not yet for me.
Uh-oh, it's showing on mine.
Okay.
Technical difficulties.
What I'm seeing is the PDF, so I'm not sure if you're sharing a different screen.
All right.
But while Jeff is working on that, one of the things that I wanted to start with, and on our second slide, once we get it up, there's a QR code and a website link too. But one of the things that I wanted to start with before we launch into our discussion today is, again, acknowledging some important things, including folks who have helped us along the way to bring this presentation forward. And before I even get into those acknowledgements, though, we thought it was important today to engage in a land acknowledgement. So I know that we're all joining virtually from different locations. Thanks, Jeff. I see the slides are up. If you want to move to the second one, for the land that I'm on today. And Hawaii is an indigenous space whose original people today are identified as Native Hawaiian. Really personally deeply grateful. And I also wanted to affirm that Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani yielded the lands in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and she yielded them to the United States, and she did so in protest and under duress. And I think that's important to point out. And while I'm not an expert on these matters and I can't speak to them, I think if folks are interested in learning more, I strongly recommend that you read Queen Liliuokalani's own words on the matter, and I'll put the link in the chat to where you can read her book. And likewise, if you see now on the slide, there's a QR code and also a hot link. If you'd like to look for the native lands that you stand on, I encourage folks to do that today and go ahead and identify your location and the indigenous people who lived there and put them in the chat. So we just invite, because I know we're all joining from different places. So please take a moment to acknowledge the lands that you stand on as well. And in addition to that acknowledgement, as I said earlier, we really wanted to thank our collaborators who are unable to be here today, but who contributed substantially to this project. And we wanted to thank the APIC Board of Directors for supporting this work, and also the APIC Postdoctoral Committee, which supported a great deal of this work. And we additionally wanted to acknowledge that while we started this project before the COVID-19 pandemic and the twin pandemics that we're facing now, so we really needed to update it. And so we wanted to still speak to the work that we started before the pandemic, but also add to it with more current information. And so I'm grateful for everybody who was able to make that happen, because it took some effort to get the updated data to make this more relevant to the current times. But essentially we were prepped to give this presentation and the pandemic hit. And, you know, it's a year later now, here we are. So again, just wanted to acknowledge all of those things. All right. And all right, so this brings us to our learning objectives, which Mary shared with us a bit earlier, but we just wanted to, hopefully people will walk away with 4 key things. We wanted you to have a sense of what are common, at least 2 common characteristics of the listings in the UPPD. So those post-internship or postdoctoral opportunities, we wanted you to have a strong sense of those. We wanted you to have a sense of what are the top 3 to even 5 reasons that applicants say they are pursuing postdoctoral training opportunities. And then as training directors of postdoctoral programs, we wanted you to have the ability to identify, through some hands-on discussion, to identify strategies, at least one that you could engage in to improve your recruitment and selection now that you have knowledge of these data today. And then also for those of you who are internship training directors, we know many people function in both roles. We wanted you to have some strategies or leave with at least one tangible strategy that you could engage in to improve your mentorship of interns who are applying for postdoctoral opportunities. So those are objectives, and thanks. Thank you very much, Jeff, for moving the slides along. So I want to just give a little bit of background. Again, we have another QR code. This will take you to information on the APIC and APA Postdoctoral Summit that's on the APIC website. Sometimes it can be difficult to navigate websites, so we thought we'd put that direct link there for you. So just want to make note of that. And in terms of the background for our conversation today, a lot of this work for us, of course, started before this, but for us stems from the work we engaged in at the APIC and APA Summit on postdoctoral training in 2016. And so out of that meeting, we don't have time to go into all the details of the meeting and what came out of it. But again, I encourage you to check out the materials on the APIC website. And also I'll make note that a special section of training in education and professional psychology, TEP, our journal, is dedicated to what came from the summit in 2016. So I really encourage folks to go to those materials to read more. Some of the take homes from the summit, though, is that the postdoctoral training community or landscape in professional psychology or health service psychology is less developed in many ways compared to other points in the education and training pipeline in psychology. So compared to the doctoral level of training, compared to the doctoral internship level of training. And that landscape is less defined because we don't know as much about it. And that was definitely a takeaway from the summit. We don't know as much about it. It's more variable. And that stems from a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is because we see less engagement in accreditation for training programs, more diversity in training options that wouldn't necessarily lend themselves to an accredited pathway, and less APIC membership. And that's important because if programs are accredited or members of APIC, of course, we have directories where we can look them up. So we have a better sense of what's in the landscape. And then when programs participate at earlier junctions in the pipeline and things like the match, again, we have formal processes that we can look at to learn more about the landscape. And with postdoctoral training, that's less true. While there is a match for one specialty, only a subset of that specialty participates in that match. And so we don't have as much information about the broad landscape of post-internship and postdoctoral training options. And so all of this not knowing and diversity and opportunities impacts how we engage in recruitment and selection for those of us who are postdoctoral training directors. And it also impacts how we mentor interns who are considering post-internship opportunities or formal postdoctoral training. And so again, we wanted to bring more understanding about this landscape. That was a walk away from, or a takeaway, I should say, from the 2016 summit, is we wanted to have a better understanding of what does the landscape look like, how can we come together as a training community and work towards common goals, increasing both collaboration and communication. And so all of that started, and really prior to the summit, but continued since the summit. And then now we find ourselves in the midst of these dual pandemics, right? And all of that impacts all of these things as well. So that's just a little bit of the background. It's diverse. We know less about it. We're trying to bring people together. There are fewer formalized mechanisms in place at the postdoctoral level. And it's an important, and yet it's an important piece of health service psychology training. And it's important for us to come together and share what we know and shape the pathway forward. So that's part of what brings all of us as presenters here today. Okay. So the good news is, if we want to move on to the next slide, in terms of some of that background, all of that informs our aims for today. And I think what's exciting about these aims is that we have data to address some of these things. So one of the things that came out of the summit is, okay, we don't know the landscape. We don't have any one entity that would have a directory of the landscape of postdoctoral training opportunities. So one idea that was brought forward from the summit was development of a listing, a centralized place to post postdoctoral training opportunities or post-internship opportunities. And that is the Universal Psychology Postdoctoral Directory, or the UPPD, which does not require membership or accreditation to participate. So now that we've had the UPPD in place for a number of years, we wanted to look at that and say, okay, what can the UPPD tell us about this landscape of postdoctoral training? And then the other side of the coin, right? So what's in the landscape, right? And then who's going there is the other side of the coin. Who are our applicants? So the other thing that we want to do today is try to describe some of the considerations that applicants to postdoctoral or post-internship training opportunities, what are their considerations? What are they looking for? And then again, as we talked about in our learning objectives, we really wanted the training directors who are here to be able to, think together as a team, right? All of us come together as a team and decide for our own programs and also within our community, what are some things that we can do to apply this information to our recruitment and selection procedures? And also, how can we use this information to help mentor our trainees? And then our final aim was to provide a sneak peek, but I'm pleased to say that we fully integrated the 2020-2021 data. So it's really a full view instead of a sneak peek. We weren't sure we could deliver, and I'm really excited that we are able to. So we'll move forward to the method of how did we answer these questions. So there again, we have another QR code, and this is to the UPPD. If folks are unfamiliar with it, if you want to check out what it looks like, you can go directly to the website, which is linked to or adjacent to the APIC website. But again, you don't need to be an APIC member program to participate in the UPPD. It has wonderful searchable functions. So I'll get out of UPPD for a second and just talk about our method. So this was a project that we put forward for IRB review. It is considered a human subjects research, but it was deemed exempt by the IRB that reviewed it. And again, this landscape has two pieces: what is in it and who is applying. And so to answer the what does the landscape look like, what are the programs that are in this picture, we use the UPPD. And again, you've got the hot link there and also the QR code to check it out for yourself if you're unfamiliar with it. But our goals with use of the UPPD for this project were to do a download into a spreadsheet to just get a snapshot of what was posted in the UPPD at certain points in time, and to capture the broad range of post-internship training opportunities that were posted there within that directory. And we did that in the 2018-2019 recruitment and selection season. And then we did that again this season, the 2020-2021 season. And so that's one piece of our methods. And then if we move forward to the next slide, The other side of the coin, of course, is the applicants. You know, who are the applicants and what do they have to say about their experience searching for, applying for postdoctoral training opportunities. And so to answer that question, we looked at the APIC postdoctoral applicant survey. And so again, the goal here is to really understand what are the interests, what are they looking for in postdoctoral training opportunities, what is their experience of recruitment and selection, especially as we try to bring more order to that experience over the last 5 years through use of uniform notification dates, postdoctoral selection guidelines, things like that. We want to hear from the applicants who are engaged in that process. What is that like? And also, what is their experience using these APIC products that we've put together? And so we, again, have survey data from the 2018-2019 period, pre-pandemic, and then also this current period of recruitment and selection, 2020-2021. And the way that we recruit for participation in the survey is by sending emails to all of the match participants from the previous cycle. So people who would be on internship now through their participation in the match last year is who received the email this year and invitation to participate. And the same was true for 2018-2019. Okay. All right, and so then this will bring us to our first objective, which is to get a better lay of the land. What are the programs looking like in the UPPD, and how has it changed over the 2 cycles that we're talking about? And so I want to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Wayne Siegel, to talk about the UPPD. And we all felt we could speak to any of these components, but I really wanted Wayne to speak to this component because I feel like he's shepherded the creation of this idea out of the Postdoctoral Summit all the way through these last 5 years of implementation and taken in the feedback that we all have had as a training community to refine it each year over year. So I feel a bit like it's your baby, Wayne, and I really wanted you to have the opportunity to talk about it. So I'll turn it over to you to share what we know about the landscape from the UPPD.
Thank you, Allison, for that introduction as well. The UPPD is one of my favorite topics. It's dear to my heart, and I've put a lot of care and attention, as have many others on the board and the postdoc committee. So, as Allison mentioned, the UPPD, let me just get my timer going so I can stay on task. The UPPD was one of the core recommendations to come out of the Postdoctoral Summit, and serving 2 main purposes that are worth repeating. One was that there could be a central place where programs could list their positions, and then, as important, that there could be one place for applicants to search for positions. And we have the APIC directory for internship programs, and APIC member postdoc programs are in there as well. But APIC member postdoc programs only represented a fraction of, and we have some numbers coming up to say how much, a fraction of those programs. The UPPD also, we didn't know much about what the world of postdoc training looked outside of APIC members. There was really no data on that. And so the UPPD has given us a very more accurate picture of that. And with that, I want to point out it's been a developing resource over the years, and we're comparing the data that we got 2 years ago to the data now. But the data, I want to be careful, doesn't necessarily reflect change because it's gaining, the UPPD is gaining more popularity, more people are aware of it, they're recognizing the value of listing their programs. So some of the changes could reflect changes in the postdoc world, and it also reflects programs recognizing that it's beneficial to them to list their programs in there. And I may offer some opinions about which I think is what as we review this. So this is the demographic makeup. There's an overall increase in listings. And I would say this increase dramatically, this data dramatically decreases the increase that we're seeing in the total number of listings, because in 2019, there were about 350 listings that had been, that were outdated, that not had been updated in over 2.5 years, and we deleted them. We got rid of them. They were creating problems with the directory. We figured if people didn't make those changes or updates, that we could go ahead and do that. So That's not reflected in this data, so there's actually been kind of more added. The other thing worth noting is you'll see with the private practice clinic setting is there's no 2018 data, and so there's been a dramatic increase because we added that category in 2019. It's not one of the, I guess, maybe official settings that the field has used, but there are a lot of postdoctoral programs out of private practices, so it made sense to do that. We'll also notice that there is a big increase in med school health service settings or health science settings. And again, I don't know that that represents a dramatic increase in the number of those types of programs. I believe that more of those programs are now utilizing the directory. It could also represent an increase. We're not exactly sure. And then you can see from the category missing that there's been a sharp decrease, and that likely reflects those listings that were removed, and then more programs. We actually, I think it was 2019, cleared out fields and required programs to enter. They couldn't save the listings unless they entered. So we got more of a complete picture of that. So this is kind of evolving. Jeff, could we go to the next slide? Then look at, here's the information that we have on accreditation and APIC members. It has stayed relatively stable. Accredited programs represent about 34%. That's up about 4%, probably not very meaningful or significant. APIC programs represent about 55%, up about 8% from past years. And then people's favorite questions about what does it look like programs following the guidelines. And this is self-report. This is what programs are indicating in their listing that they're intending to follow the guidelines. And we do have language in there that they're promising to go ahead and do that. We realize that maybe some may not always do that, but this is what we have in there. The data really has not changed very much at all. Slight decrease in programs that say that they're not following the guidelines. Now, there's not been a decrease in programs saying they're following the guidelines. So we believe that some of the newer listings that people utilizing the UPPD, maybe those programs coming into the fold, so to speak, are some programs that are choosing not to do that. And then there's also been a pretty significant increase in programs that are exempt, and that would be clinical neuropsychology programs and research-focused programs. And I would venture to say, for the same reason, that more of those are adding their listings to the UPPD. They weren't there before, so it looks like there's an increase. Could we go to the next slide, Jeff? And then I found this very interesting. Looking at emphasis and focus areas. So there really does seem to be a sharp increase in the number of programs that are doing specialty focus area training. And would believe that this likely represents a trend that is occurring across the postdoctoral field. This is consistent with one of the agreements that came out of the postdoc summit. And this is kind of how APA talks about postdoc as well, that postdoc is for advanced or specialized training. And so this trend is recognizing that there is kind of more of this specialized focus. Not exactly sure kind of why we're seeing this, but it does seem to be a where we're moving in there. So one might hypothesize that if programs maybe are having trouble filling, that maybe it's because they're offering more kind of generalist training rather than this kind of increased availability and demand for specialized and advanced training. So could we go to the next slide? And this looks at setting and and who's following the uniform notification date and the APIC selection guidelines. So VA is leading the pack. VA requires their programs to follow the guidelines. I can personally speak to the fact that VA Office of Academic Affiliations does reach out to programs when they are aware that this may not be occurring. And APIC and the postdoc committee appreciate that greatly. And if you look at, these are just kind of percentage within category. So like correction programs in correctional settings look like there's been this sharp decrease. That represents, I believe there are like 17 correctional programs in the listing. So that percentage, we're actually not looking at very numbers. And so the percentages look kind of overinflated. And so again, have stayed pretty consistent kind of over the time period that we're looking at. And the next slide, Jeff. Okay, so the last slide that I referred to is more focus areas. This is kind of looking at more specialties. Same trend that we're seeing, dramatic increase in programs that are offering those type of specialties. Neuropsych seems to be the biggest kind of area of increase. And as I said before, I think neuropsych programs are just using the UPPD more. And then one of the biggest areas of increase outside of that seems to be child pediatric programs. And this looks like that it's not just kind of programs being added that are kind of seems to reflect a change. And I'm referencing some other survey data for that as well too. And then the next slide just gives us similar data, but kind of more breakdown, and you can actually see the numbers I have in the far right category where it has the percent change from prior, and looking at specialty and kind of focus area training. And we'll note there is some overlap in focus areas. Some programs are listing that are specialty are also listing in a focus area, and it's very, it was not possible to kind of parse those out. And I believe we're on to our next.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hear you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm Amy Silverbogen, and I'm going to be moving us away from the UPPD and switching gears to learn more about the trainees who completed the post-UND survey. So you can see the objective there. Okay, so let's first just think about what percentage of trainees applied for a postdoc position. And on many of these slides upcoming, you'll see that we have some highlighted differences between the 2018 to 2019 recruitment cycle and then the 2020-2021 recruitment cycle. So on this slide, the 2018 data is reflected in the pie chart and in the black text. And we know that approximately 82% of those who completed the survey applied to at least one postdoc position, with that number increasing to almost 86% in 2020, representing a 3.5% increase. We don't know if that increase is significant, but we do know that over the past several years in data collections predating 2018, there had been a trend of fewer people applying to postdoc. And with this year, we can see, at least in this data point, that that trend is leveling off. Next slide. Okay. So here we have the data illustrating the top reasons for applying to postdoc, which include seeking hours for licensure, being competitive for future employment, obtaining advanced competency within a focus or specialty area, and then obtaining additional professional mentorship and professional identity development. So these are factors that the interns ranked in reasons for applying for a postdoc. There's really no change when looking at the data from this 2018 to 2020. And an important consideration is the ways in which diversity, equity, and inclusion may intersect with these factors. There may be diversity variables that differentially impact response to these factors. And we're going to think about that a little bit more in the next slide when I review the reasons that applicants gave for not applying to postdoc. And the reasons given were either receiving or expecting a job offer, postdoc salaries being too low, and not wanting to relocate. And again, no real change across the two time points. I was surprised that the not wanting to relocate factor was not higher during this past recruitment cycle, given the impact of COVID-19, but there was little change. So let's pause here and just think, oh, can you go back, Jeff? Go back to thinking about the potential diversity, equity, and inclusion factors that could intersect here about who does and does not apply to postdoc. And we can think about the differential impact of salary, professional identity development, and or needing to relocate on some groups, for example, considerations of socioeconomic status, personal factors such as being a single parent or a primary breadwinner, being a caregiver to a child or an older adult. There are differences in rural versus urban locations in the education or workforce pipeline, and certainly needing to access a particular religious or cultural community. So these are all just factors that you know, are only the start of a very long list of things that could be considered when you're thinking about the factors that impact whether or not someone applies to a postdoc. All right, next slide, Jeff. So in our most recent survey, we did ask participants about their preferred setting for their career. In other words, where do you want to work when you grow up? And you'll see that the top 3 preferred settings included the medical school or health science center, private practice, and VA medical center. We may be able to apply this data to thinking about postdoc settings and which settings might be more likely to fill and which might be less likely to fill. It may be a consideration that some of those lower ranked settings have more difficulty filling their postdoc positions. We don't have great data on sites that don't fill, so this is more of a question at this stage, but certainly something that you know, I think about when I see this slide. Next slide, Jeff. And again, a new question asked in our most recent survey were, you know, what are the activities that you want to do when you begin your professional career? And you'll see that here that the top 4, if you look at them, are direct care, intervention and assessment, as well as research, and then provision of supervision. And later on, we're going to ask you all to think about ways in which the data presented today can help shape your programs. And this slide might be particularly relevant for that conversation. For example, knowing that a highly desirable professional activity is provision of supervision could influence the amount of energy and time your site puts into that training area. So if this is an area that's not emphasized, you know, maybe it's something to take a closer look at. All right, next slide. We can dig a little deeper in terms of the importance of research training for applicants, although it's pretty split. So as you can see, 50% of those who responded indicated that it was not important, and 40% stated it was fairly or extremely important, and no real change for 2020. So I'm not sure what to make of that, but it's interesting to see that there is such a big split in our applicants. Next slide. Okay, in this slide and in the next, we're highlighting those elements which applicants considered when ranking programs. And so this slide, we have the 2018 data. And as you can see, the top areas included really training specific qualities, so specific training opportunities, or the program's perceived training quality or reputation. Whereas the next two highly ranked factors included kind of more personal factors such as geographic location or work-life balance. And again, these personal factors may be more influenced or impacted by diversity factors. Again, thinking about things like, I have a child and I can't move, or I have all my family in one area of the country, or caregiving responsibilities where work-life balance is prioritized different, or access to religious or cultural communities. So lots of diversity factor considerations in here as well. Next slide. And here we have the most recent data. And while the question asked was the same as the 2018 question, so what are the things that you're prioritizing when ranking, the options were modified. So there's not a one-to-one comparison here between the 2018 and 2020 data. So I think we added a few items and then also took out some of those training specific qualities that have always been consistently highly ranked. And notably, geography is the #1 reason or #1 factor in ranking. And obviously, we're all thinking about the COVID pandemic here and the impact of COVID on decision-making for interns looking for postdoctoral positions. We also added focus on diversity training in this survey from 2020. It is a highly ranked factor in terms of applicant considerations. And in this, we think about the other pandemic of racial injustice and the impact that this has had on training sites and the focus on providing training on culturally sensitive care, and in turn on applicant considerations of where they want to spend their postdoctoral year. Next slide. All right, so I think this is great data. We're going to talk in this slide and the next slide about the APIC postdoc selection guidelines and the uniform notification date. And the great news is that for both this earlier 2018 data, and you'll see in the next slide in a few minutes, the 2020 data, that most applicants, 89%, secure a postdoc at their #1 or #2 ranked program. And that's just pretty fantastic. On the postdoc committee, we're always thinking about whether the APIC selection guidelines are working and who are they working for. And with this, we can say the guidelines are working for applicants. We know that about a third, can you go back for 1 second? About a third of applicants secure their position, their postdoc around the UND, with a quarter securing it before the UND. And 20% of applicants accepted a position at their internship sites. This is a minority of applicants, and I know that in thinking about this data, I wonder how much this varies by setting, and obviously it's impacted by the availability of postdoc opportunities at different settings. So next slide, please. And in 2020, I already gave you a little bit of a forecast. 90% of the applicants who responded to the survey secured their #1 or #2 ranked program. And the numbers in terms of uniform notification date were a little different. So 47% secured their postdoctoral placement on or within a day of the UND. And that's up 15% from 2 years prior. So certainly makes us, this is new data that we haven't had too much time to talk or think about, but definitely gives us something to think about in terms of who's cooperating with the APIC guidelines. And then approximately the same amount of applicants who applied for a postdoc ended up at their internship site, stayed at their current site. And next slide. Okay, so in this slide, we ask applicants to talk a little bit about the extent to which their internship training director and their internship supervisors or mentors, the extent to which they were helpful in guiding them through the postdoctoral process, and how much they got education and information about the postdoc process from these different groups of people. And our data shows that applicants continue to feel that their understanding about postdoc selection is limited and that the guidance they're receiving is limited. It does appear that internship faculty are more helpful than internship training directors. And in the 2020 data, we can see that internship training directors were more helpful than they have been in the past. But I feel like this is definitely an area where there's still a lot more work to be done to promote understanding of postdoc selection and offer support throughout the process. Next slide. And I think I'm passing it off to Beth now.
Great, thank you. So we're moving into some open discussion, audience participation section of this. And we'd like to encourage people to use the chat function, to use the raise hand function, and to just unmute to discuss the issues as they arise. So our first learning objective is on this slide, and we want to be thinking about strategies for improvement of recruitment and selection, in our own programs. Jeff, can you move to the next? So the first discussion prompt is for us to think about how the factors that postdoctoral applicants reported as being priorities for them in applying to and ranking programs intersect with our training programs. And just to remind people, some of the top factors were geography was at the top, but also prospective employment, pay and benefits, focus on diversity training. Those were sort of some of the most highly ranked elements across the 2 years where the survey happened. So thinking about that, how does that work with what you have available? And are there changes that you can make or things that you're thinking about to enhance recruitment?
What do folks think? What are things we can all do to enhance recruitment? I'm thinking about the red bar chart with the setting, like some of the tasks folks said they wanted to engage in, or the competencies they wanted to utilize in their professional practice. I'm wondering if anyone got any ideas of things that they might. Right, yes. So Wayne's putting in the chat, are we as programs offering what the applicants want? Did anyone have any new ideas about what they might highlight even more or add to based on what applicants were saying they're looking for?
Yeah, I'm seeing a comment in the chat, and we've heard some about this in some of the community calls also, but that some programs have created videos for recruitment, for internship or postdoc, and that particularly during this time, we've been getting feedback that it's been effective. I would agree with that. My personal experience has been the same. I think that was really welcomed by applicants. Some more comments, sort of think. Oh, go ahead.
I saw one idea that came from a postdoc was also the opportunity to supervise others. So promoting that as something, if it's offered, or even if it's partial, or even if it's, a possibility for your site to supervise other people or students, that would be something to promote.
Yeah, I think that is something that, we hear a lot from applicants and we get questions about. So I think that's a really good point, promoting it and also making sure that it's clear, in your website materials, so that people are aware if those opportunities exist. Which there's a comment in the chat about that too, sort of making sure that that's represented beyond the direct care work. If you do offer supervision opportunities, making sure that that is available. Some others are mentioning sort of virtual information sessions as well as videos. So it sounds like we're having a discussion somewhat about, like, generally making sure that applicants understand what the range of opportunities are at our programs. through having videos, having virtual sessions, informational sessions, and also, you know, posting things on our website.
There's also some discussion prior about maybe at university counseling centers training being more generalist and how to create opportunities. As someone who is at a counseling center, while it's not a specialty as recognized by the field, we do offer internships that postdoc fellowships that specialize in like certain projects. So we have a gender and sexual identity focus for one. We have a outreach and social justice focus for another. We have a training track. Someone basically is an apprentice in training and they end up chairing the postdoc search with my guidance and assistance. So I think there's ways to get creative, and perhaps when you're recruiting or interviewing, it might be helpful to think about a question to get the trainee to think about what kind of interest do they have? What initiatives would they take? So I think we're, co-creating some opportunities for engagement in the activities they're looking for could be helpful.
I mean, I really like that idea, Mary, also because some of the options that you mentioned mirror some professional paths that people might be particularly interested in taking. And so to kind of have it tailored to be doing something like training, I think that's a wonderful opportunity too. Some more discussion too about, how much are we transparent or even talk about work-life balance in our materials. And also another comment about relating to this overall emphasis that we're seeing in the data about increased specialization. And it sounds like I'm seeing also from Erica that there's been, in terms of the applicants, people have also been sharing that, there's a trade-off potentially between salary and the work week hours in favor of work-life balance.
Beth, just a general comment is, I think from the data and people's comments is to look at, I've been doing postdoctoral training for a long time, and we just assume that we have this great training program and position and people will want that. But things have changed. And so I think thinking critically about what are we offering? Is it what people are really wanting? Are we advertising it in a way that people want? And maybe we need to do a better job of highlighting focused area training, specialty area training. Maybe a thought just popped in about highlighting the competencies that are unique that our program does and our public material, so people kind of know what they're getting, what separates kind of my program from other programs. But I think stepping back and thinking about that critically, and then if positions that we have are not getting filled routinely, maybe those are areas, maybe this is just a natural evolution that's occurring. We do know, and this wasn't mentioned before, there are significantly more positions than applicants. And so there are numbers that are going to get filled. Unfortunately, we don't know, we don't have those finite numbers of applicants either, because the survey only represents a fraction of applicants.
I think some of our next discussion prompts are along some of the themes that are showing up in the chat as well. And I really like the idea of that Shiloh has put in here also, as well as, really focusing on how postdoc offers a different level of professional engagement and how to really illustrate in your recruitment materials how it's different from, it's not internship 2.0, which is, I think that's a great phrase. It's a great way to think about it. So.
Yeah, I had the same reaction when I read Shiloh's comment, just thinking about leadership opportunities and committee work and ways to highlight kind of how a trainee can be extended in very new ways, in ways that they've never potentially had experience in previously.
Do we, I'm also seeing a comment from Sam about, changes in the salaries, differences between the timelines on the research postdocs and the clinical, also location and how sort of there's a, there's some changes. And I think some of us have noticed some of those research offers happening earlier and earlier. And how do we think about those things? I also want to make sure that we're covering some of the other questions that are further down on this slide. I don't know if others, want to focus on those, but there's some about DEI and your site's response to COVID-19.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I mean, I think a number of those themes have been woven into some of the chat response from our participants today. So thanks for those of you who are chatting and unmuting and speaking up. And I think in some ways, it's been on my mind quite a bit is how do we come back from, COVID, and what do we take with us? What have we learned, and how can it continue to be applied? And I think particularly around matters of diversity and social justice, as well as telehealth and other teleworking and other components of our institutional responses to COVID-19, that those really can be strengths that we could highlight and we can continue to build on. And so that was one thought that I was having as I was seeing some of the chat responses. And I'm curious if people are noticing some of those things that you've put in that you've already done. Maybe you've added supports to address equity, you've added a social justice learning component, things like that in this past year, or of course, more of a focus on telehealth and teleworking. So I'm curious if folks have identified some things like that you've done and that you plan to keep, and if that might be part of what you take forward and use to highlight what your site has to offer in the coming years. If anyone has examples along those lines, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, along the lines of diversity and equity, it'll be interesting what programs decide to do next year in terms of virtual or in-person interviews, assuming that the pandemic is not an issue. We've got some data in the surveys that will be coming out, but what will programs do and how will they advertise that?
I think that's a good point, Wayne. Even the interview process, right? There's an equity component that's addressed by everything being remote and virtual, and both sites want to retain that. And some sites have already been doing it for that reason for many years, I'll point out, but more folks did this year than ever before. So that's a good example of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's been a lift. It was a heavy lift for us to get to that point, right? For internship and postdoc, for us to get there, to manage it virtually, for the interview process. But now that we are on the other side of it largely, I think a lot of us are thinking about how do we capitalize on the resources that we've developed? How do we incorporate this in some sustainable way? There's some comments in the chat that are really kind of talking some about the competitiveness of trying to have a postdoc position be appealing if somebody is being offered a staff position, particularly if the duties seem similar. And that postdocs have a tension between thinking about wanting that increased responsibility, wanting to be seen as a junior colleague, but knowing that there is potentially a trade-off there with the work-life balance if they're doing more supervision, taking on more teaching opportunities as well.
And then I think about how that could differentially impact some individuals who just have less flexibility to work extensively beyond a 40-hour. I mean, we all work hard at different points and we all work more than 40 hours, but that could be a real limitation and opportunities for someone who has real needs to end the day at a reasonable time most days.
It makes me think of like the shifting of what we're investing in the postdoc. So whether that's mentoring and using technology to access mentors and professional development seminars and those opportunities where that initial job can be of what the system is taking out of you. And so how are we countering? Yes, you get a lower salary and you also get this mentoring and you get this investment in your development in a way that is different than maybe that first employment opportunity may be. And so I've had some postdocs tell us like it's the pouring into an investment in me that makes the choice the good one for me and worth the lower salary.
Mhm. That's a great point. Jeff, I'm wondering if you can move us, there's another slide and another sort of objective with another set of questions. I'm wondering if you can move us, great. So this next section, we wanted to focus a little bit on mentoring interns who are considering applying to postdoctoral programs, given, you know, the data I think have been somewhat surprising to us, you know, particularly those of us who are internship training directors, at how ineffective we're perceived at times from helping folks with this process. Could you go ahead to the next slide, Jeff? So wanted to spend a few minutes, you know, reflecting on what strategies we are using to help our interns understand about postdoctoral training in general, the benefits of it, what the application process is like, how the selection process works. You know, what are we doing, and also what could we be doing better?
I'd also be interested if people are finding the resources on the postdoc site, because there's the webinars, there's a YouTube presentation, Q&A. There's a lot of resources that are available, and we don't have a great sense of the extent that they get used for this.
I almost wish we had planned ahead and could do a live survey of this audience here and what they know is available, right? Like, what are people using? What are they adapting? Are they giving their trainees that beautiful Excel spreadsheet with the ranks and the timelines and all those things? But we did not plan ahead. But if people want to comment about their knowledge of these resources, that'd be great.
So maybe I might be the N of one, but I do utilize all of the resources. I hold 2 separate seminars for the interns and the postdocs. The current postdocs participate in that because they've gone through it already. So they provide some mentorship and role modeling. But we start with folks write cover letters and we review them. Folks bring in their CVs and we review that. The interns participate in the internship selection process. So they have an experience at that point then of observing us rate and rank folks through the whole selection process. So that fills them, I think it gives them some skills with their own interviewing. Then when they begin interviewing, we meet again to discuss, they get the Excel spreadsheet. They've reviewed everything already online. And then we also have them, we meet to talk about rankings and then all of the guidelines, the APIC guidelines, and how to manage that if they've also applied to sites that are not following the APIC guidelines and review the reciprocal offers. So I make use of all of the APIC resources on the website. Yay.
We also have a pretty robust professional issues seminar. And so we start probably in August talking about why a postdoc, where do you look? And I set that up like a panel with some of our junior faculty and our recent graduates. And then we have, like Mary said, it sort of builds on itself. So we have a CV consultant come in and give them feedback on transitioning their CV to a more professional CV from a student CV. We have a cover letter workshop. We have one on interviewing. Sometimes they have to give job talks. We do sample job talks. We do a couple on negotiation. So it really is, it builds on itself as the year progresses. And then I have monthly meetings to address issues that are related more to timing. So the types of fellowships and the timelines and things like that.
That's great to hear. I feel like we have some really nice examples. That's a great example of sort of a very comprehensive way of approaching it. I like also in the chat, Ali has mentioned how they incorporate some of the website materials into group supervision, over the course of the year. And the challenges when people are at different points in their search or looking for different things. So I will say too, we have a pretty coordinated way of talking about the postdoc search and having panels, having discussions in several formats. And it's hard. It's very hard for them because they feel like they just have started internship and we're throwing them in a cold pool and they're thinking about postdoc. So there is sort of a moment of shock for a month or two and then people start to kind of orient to it. But I think it is challenging. I like that. So Wayne put a question up in the chat also about, what obstacles people are running into with regards to, we're getting at some nice examples here of things that people are doing, ways to support folks in terms of CV reviews and job talks. I like also the example in Georgia where training directors take turns hosting a conference. I think that's wonderful too, and gives you some diversity of perspectives, and also some of the considerations that should be made around, working with trainees of color when they're thinking about how to make this decision-making process too. That's a wonderful example too. I'm wondering if anyone, what aren't we doing? That's kind of Wayne's question. And maybe all of us are the 25% that people think are doing a good job, but maybe not. And what illustrates that gap and really what could we do better?
I'm typing time ? And then also maybe we don't understand the process either. It's complex and confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with some of the comments that are popping up in the chat too here, from Marnie also. I think that there is something fundamentally difficult about going from the very coordinated internship match process into this much less coordinated. And even though it's much more predictable than it was many years ago, each cohort is new, and to them, it just looks much more chaotic than the internship match did. So, but I think we need to do, a better job. Issues around also people not, how different sites are contributing to this by not following, I think you mean the UND, the Uniform Notification, and just the difficulty in decision making around the different time points when they're under time pressures from different places.
It makes me think a little bit about educating about the postdoc process earlier on, because I think in graduate schools, DCTs are talking a lot about internship and getting ready for internship. And I don't know how much DCTs at the graduate level are talking about postdocs and those next steps, what happens after internship. And so I do wonder about kind of extending that knowledge and education down. So it's not just the internship training directors that need to, they can be reinforcing the messages that have already been introduced at the graduate level. So it just becomes part of the conversation, as opposed to this whole brand new swamp that interns have to dive into within the first months of starting internship.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we do hear that people, our trainees don't know that much about it from graduate school at all. I think you're right. There are a couple of other comments in the chat about things like, certainly about a lot of people getting offers before uniform notification, and a lot of people feeling like they're losing applicants in that way. Also, the challenges of being in a consortium and having people with very different things that they're looking for and needing to help guide them. And I think that that may be partly why we see the data about the faculty, in addition to the training directors, being particularly helpful. So we can't be all things to all people, but we have colleagues who are doing supervision and mentoring that help that as well.
Yes, Beth, I was really thinking about that comment from Jessica about just specialists, right? There's some areas of specialty that can lead to board certification. And for those of us who are outside of that specialty, we're, not just neuropsychology, though clinical neuropsych, of course, comes to mind, but, geropsychology too. I think there's just some specialties, forensic, where if we're outside of it, we may feel that we're not best positioned. But if we're in a large generalist program or a large consortium, we certainly may have interns that are looking toward some of those specialties. And
yes, right.
That was a good comment about, and you, in response to your question about what might our blind spots be, what is it that we're not doing, that definitely jumped out to me as something that I certainly feel ill-prepared to address some of those pretty nuanced specialties. Yeah.
Beth,
there's a really important comment. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Wayne. I was going to go to Liz's comment in the chat. Go ahead.
Made a comment earlier about losing about 50% of her applicants and how this is all very stressful and it not being consistent with the data. If we were to go back, that actually is consistent with the data between people getting early offers from, and then reciprocal offers that are made where they've obtained those positions. We're looking in the high 40s about that. That seems terrible, but then we contrast that with the data that Amy presented, where people are getting their first or second choice. And then there's a question that I don't have handy, I can't pop up there, but from the survey data, we asked applicants if they were made an early offer, did they feel pressured to take a position that they didn't want to before they had the information? And for the most part, they said no, that they did not feel that way, which I was shocked because I thought that's the first time we've ever asked that question. So I'm not sure what to make of all of that, other than maybe the process is working because applicants are getting what they want, but it's extremely stressful and stressful for postdoc directors as well.
Absolutely.
I have a different question. Do you ever get, or have you seen in the data any questions about maybe having more experiences, like more of a variation of experiences, like I'm just thinking about med school and their rotations. Like you could do a rotation in peds and a rotation in geriatrics and a rotation in, different types of things. And I feel like maybe sometimes students are kind of funneled into based on whatever experiences they've had, and maybe they I'm wondering if that has come up in the research, that maybe people want more of an opportunity to have a wider variety of experiences either before postdoc or during their postdoc year.
I mean, Wayne, do you have any thoughts about that?
The only thing that I can think of that might
ahead.
apply is from the applicant survey from 2 years ago, and then also is we were struck with the varied number of types of programs that applicants applied to. So people applied across a range of research focus and then emphasis in specialty areas that you think would not align with each other. So maybe people are looking for a range of experiences. I don't know the answer to that. But that data was bizarre. I don't know, but it's been replicated. So people are applying to a wide range of interests. It's not this super narrow. So.
There's a, go ahead, Allison, you go.
I was just going to say we're aware of the time and we're winding up with our last minute. So I think we just wanted to be sure that any questions that we hadn't addressed generally like these, that we have a chance to address those. That's all I wanted to be sure to say. And I think to that end, Sharon has a question in the chat about, do we have program data in terms of how well do our programs do? So this is working for applicants. They're getting their first or second choice. What about programs? So do we have that from the?
I've not pulled apart the program survey. Our response rate is lower with programs. They're just not as motivated to provide that information. They are less satisfied. And that's really always been the case because more people have positions unfilled. Applicants are getting their positions for the most part. So they seem to be generally happy. As a training director, when you don't fill your positions or you're struggling, that's extremely frustrating. But we'll be having the data come out, 4 to 6 weeks, possibly earlier. We'll have some summaries of both surveys kind of up there for people to take a look at. And there's some really interesting results this year that I think can help us think about this more.
I know we're at the end of our time, so I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of your day to join us for the kickoff of Virtual Conference 2020 in 2021.
Great.
And thank you for the support, Mary and Jeff, in allowing us to do this. And
I'll be sending a link to the survey for the program, as well as it'll have a link to the certificate for those of you who were able to attend the meeting today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Really appreciate everyone's time and collaboration. Bye for now. See you next month.
Good weekend.